Today we welcome Austin Stefani, CRO at DBT Labs.
If you're in one job and you just go to the next job and the job after that, and you're just learning from people that are exactly like you, there's only so much skill that you can get. But if you kind of put yourself in different experiences, get a different point of the business, you'll get a lot more out of it.
In this episode, we talk about how the fundamentals really underpin Austin's incredible career trajectory.
People come company to company and they're like, oh, I'm just going to run it the way we ran it at the last place. But they weren't there to actually solve the problem at the last place. So I think really getting good at like the problem identification and then figure out what is the solution to that problem specific to where you are at the stage you're at. Those are the key things. Of leaders that do that really well will be able to grow with the company.
We talk about his focus on ensuring that as many of his people are as successful as they can possibly be.
And how do you take the org chart and flip it upside down? It really comes down to like, how do I make each individual rep on my team successful? And if we do that, every first line leader will be successful, and every second line leader, then so goes the company.
And we also talk about how he's been able to scale his career to the CRO that he is today. This is his playbook. This episode is sponsored by PGAI and Seller. Go and discover how these solutions can help amplify your sales execution. Check out the descriptions below. Welcome to Hunters and Unicorns. I'm Simon Kutis and I'm joined by my co-host Ollie Kune.
Welcome back to the show, everyone.
And it's with great pleasure that we introduce Austin Stefani. Austin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Really appreciate you coming on the show today.
By way of an introduction, you are currently Chief Revenue Officer over at DBT Labs.
Yep, correct.
And as per the introduction, you've had some amazing exposure to organizations kind of through early stages, and you've been exposed to so many different challenges along the way. You know, at every stage, at every junction, you've been exposed to another problem that you've had to solve, and that's really kind of helped you grow your career. Where we want to start today is just by understanding what is the kind of the fundamental principles that have really helped you along that way? Yeah,
I was fortunate to start my career at EMC, right? And we got taught kind of medic at a young age, right? Mark Thurman, who we worked for, was ex-BTC, said this is a gift that you guys don't realize that we're giving you that will help you your whole career, and there was no truer thing. So I think having some of the basics, it always goes back to basics of like MedPick, things like recruit, retention, and revenue being like core tenets. You can always go back to regardless of the situation, and just how do you figure out being great at those things? And then really, it's for me the biggest thing is like we're all overhead as leaders, right? And how do you take the org chart and flip it upside down? It really comes down to like, how do I make each individual rep on my team successful? And if we do that, every first line leader will be successful, and every second line leader, then so goes the company. And it's really not much more complex than that, but everything has to kind of serve that mentality.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that because that's a fundamental, it's such a basic concept, right? But it's also quite easy to just focus on execution. And the thing is, you're not just talking about execution, you know, at the various stages, there is more to that. So help us understand, you know, what is it that you're doing at those stages that have helped you kind of conquer the various challenges along the way?
Yeah, I think you know, it always goes back to pipeline, right? So looking at each individual territory and making sure that is every rep in a place to be successful, right? Are they doing the things as well as the other kind of legs of the stool that help pipeline generation, marketing, SDR? Is it consistent down to the territory level? Because again, if you don't have the pipeline, you're going to do deals, right? And then it goes from there from like a sales process. Do you have a consistent sales process and a common framework around like gates to make sure like what does it take to win each stage? And you know that's kind of the next piece. And that just gives you data to look at to figure out, okay, where are our hotspots? Do we not have enough pipeline coverage in a certain territory? Where are we getting stuck in the sales process? And then you can kind of jump in and see, you know, areas to focus, right? What are the opportunities of like problems to go solve? Because if one rep is running into a challenge, there's probably the rest of the reps are either going to see it or have seen it, right? And it allows you kind of give you the areas to focus on, right? So I think that's, you know, from a starting point, I think those are the key elements.
What are the kind of the kind of, again, the fundamentals of that? Have you got kind of a number that you're aiming for in terms of kind of productivity or kind of ramp levels? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think again, it comes down to those leading indicators, and it's really not just picking out numbers out of the air. It's like, what does it take to make a successful rep, right? How much pipeline are they creating? And going backwards, so like how much activity? What are those activities they're doing every day, every week to make them successful, to create the pipeline, to then get to the early stage of like probably finding the problem for their customer, to then get to the next stage where they're meeting with an EB, to then to do technical validation. So I think it starts with those leading indicators, but it always comes back to productivity. Like productivity is like the most important metric, and everything services that, right? And if you make more reps successful, right, and a higher percentage of your reps are successful, then your productivity will go up, right? And then the money that you're investing in your go-to-market is netting the result that you need. But it all comes back to productivity.
What was the aha moment, or when in your career did you realize that this was one of your superpowers?
Like I said, I spent 12 years at EMC, right?
Yeah.
And it was an awesome experience, great place to learn. And I worked with, I had an unbelievable team, right? I was a rep, and I worked with people like my leader was Jim Kavanaugh, who was ex-PTC, and I think he runs the Americans for Cribble. I was on the same team. Chris Degnan, right, from Snowflake. Mark Fleming, who runs the enterprise for Snowflake. Brian O'Shea, who's the CRO of Base 10. And I'm sure I'm forgetting more, right? People like Amy Fowler, the GM of Pure. But like being on an A team, saw what it takes to be successful. And then I went to SAP to kind of prove that I could do it outside of EMC. And at SAP, it was the big thing was it was a very have and have not world. Like 17% of the reps hit the number, and we always had north of 60% of the reps over the number. So we never missed a number. So it was obvious that the more people you make successful, the more success you have, and then everything kind of guided to that, because I couldn't like use the playbook at SAP because they had their own go-to-market, but I had to kind of use those things and see the problems that we had to go kind of serve that purpose. And when I went to Rubrik, that was a guiding principle, right, that I said in the first day of how do we make everyone successful.
So when you start to break this down and put, the theory to test, and you start to break this down, help us understand more around, the practicalities on going and establishing where those breakdowns are.
Yeah, again, I think these are all frameworks, right? They're not instruction manuals, and I think a lot of one of the lessons that's learned from working at startups is like you get really good at problem identification.
Yeah.
You can't just like pick the thing up you did the last place and drop it in. But I think it gives you the frameworks kind of give you the ability to see where your challenges are, right? So when I got to DBT, right, 80% of our leads came inbound, which is great, but it doesn't scale, right? And they were a different persona than we wanted to go to in terms of selling to EBs. And I think that by focusing the team and seeing that kind of trend allowed me to like kind of galvanize the team around pipeline generation and why it was important to them, and like why everyone needed a personal PG plan, and why half the pipeline had to come from the sales directors, right? And that's one example. Another one, when I got to Rubrik, we were slipping something like 30% of our deals every single month, and we were in a monthly number, right? And we had kind of POCs everywhere. So we called them all back and we said, okay, what's going on with these? Why are these not converting? Why are deals kind of stalling? And the common trend was like the deals that we met with an executive buyer before we did a proof of value, right? Those deals we converted like 80%. And the ones that we didn't do that, we were trying to get the POC or POV to sell for us, those are converting at like 15%. So you can see it a little bit in the data, but then it comes down to like, okay, great. How do we be great at this? How do we put it in a gate to say, hey, no POC or POV without meeting with an EB, and then teaching the reps on how to have that conversation, and then getting everyone on the same page to drive that consistency. Because if it's happening, again, 80% of the time, you're going to convert more, and it's going to equate to your productivity. So you got to get really good at that problem identification, and then lean in to build the skills within the sales team so that everyone can be great at it.
Yeah.
It's easy to understand as a CRO that that's something that you would care about, but actually you were applying that quite early in your career, right? So, help us understand how you translate that mindset to the earlier stages as a first-line leader, as a second-line leader.
Yeah, I think it comes down to like, the first lesson is, when you're a successful sales rep and you get promoted to first-line leader, you get promoted because you're a great rep, but the reps that are now working for you aren't you. Right. So then you've got to be able to transfer kind of skills, right, to those people that don't have them. So like really it comes down to like understanding, realizing your overhead and making sure like what are the things my team needs, and then focus in on identifying that and then training them together, right? With context so they understand why it's important to them, and then making them better. And if you're a sales leader, like one of your tenets is making your team better, that's going to allow you to scale. And as you grow, right, one of the things is with a fast growing company, you're not growing because somebody moved out of a job. You're growing the company, you're growing the pyramid underneath you. So if you build that resiliency within sales leaders, understand how to build great people underneath them, then everyone's going to grow together.
Investing in people within your pyramid, I know that's so fundamental to your success. I know you've kind of alluded to that. But how has your early career shaped that mindset for you?
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate. I started at EMC at 21 years old. And so what that meant is I was the youngest person to do every job I ever had. And, I was successful because I worked for great people that probably spent more time than they should have investing in me. And you get to a certain point in your career and you kind of realize that was happening, probably after you have kids.
Yeah.
That was the opportunity to give back, right, when I went to Rubrik, to like have people grow underneath you and like have people meet their full potential, right? And really understand like how good can they be and how good can we be together was really a guiding principle. And, 80% of the promotions were from within, and then building. And when I came to DBT, that was really important. Of like, how do we take people in the journey? Like I came in, starting with an SDR, right, learning a bunch of skills and getting them ready for the next job as a commercial rep, and then making those commercial reps ready to be enterprise reps, and then leaders successful in all those roles. And that's built resilient companies.
Yeah, we spoke about this offline, which is the concepts of what we're talking about. Principally, are quite simple. But I think one of your superpowers that we started to talk about was that, identification of the problem is one thing, but actually being able to get into the detail was something that you really kind of, saw as a strength of yours and has helped you in this process.
Yeah, I think you've got to get down to like the ability to get down to like the bionic level of like what's going on, what's working, what isn't working is really important. Because at the end of the day, back to the context, is like as a sales leader, if you're a first line leader, you see more deals than your reps do because you have more people.
Yeah,
if you're a second line leader, you see more deals than your first line leaders and your reps do. So be able to drive that context down is really important, and not losing what's going on. And then really figuring out, well, like, if you don't know how to do it, how do you find people in the organization that are really great at the thing that you're trying to replicate, and then training everyone to be great at it, right? And I think that you just have to understand, like, one, it's great to go as deep as you can. If not, you've got to find either people that work for you or people in the organization that can help kind of figure out what great looks like, and then build that through skill training, right, which is a huge part of the retention aspect of the job.
Let's talk a little bit about skill training, because I think that is really important to you, right? In terms of, creating people that have the skills to be successful in any environment. And that's actually quite a fundamental part of how you train. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we've hired a sales leader to run enablement, right, and productivity, because again, if it's the most important metric for the company, you need somebody to kind of own that. And a lot of companies will do training on like content, right? Like, we have this new product, this is what the product does. And I think what we look for is every opportunity to like build the skill. So we have a new product release coming out at the in the next 3 weeks. Is probably the biggest one we've ever had. And instead of just training on the product itself, it's like we're using it as an opportunity to really help the team get great at driving required capabilities, understand the customer pain, right? Quantifying that pain with a metric, and then painting the after scenario and the positive business outcome, and like setting the decision criteria early, right? So that's what's reviewed in the proof of value. Like, we're using the content to train on skills, and we want people to, for instance, come to DBT Labs to get better, right? We want this to be the experience that people look back on and say, oh, we want people to work at this company because they were at DBT Labs at this period of time. And I think that having that as a guiding tenet really helps people meet that potential that I'm talking about.
This episode is sponsored by Seller. Seller provides a white glove treatment to every complex deal with their bespoke system, whilst ensuring you get the most value from your CRM for everyday selling.
So we recently interviewed Brian McCarthy, and one of the contributing facts to the success of Rubrik was actually bringing JP Bolin into running enablement, who was actually an ex-seller. You've obviously spoken about that. Is that something that you consciously took on to being as part of your playbook? And
yeah, and I think it was actually a lesson I learned early at Rubrik. Thanks to Mike Tornicasa and Jordan Ostroff, is like back to that second R. Like enablement and training is a skill, right? And if a third of your job as a leader is to train, but you haven't been trained on how to train, it's a challenge there, right? So like really early, we trained all the sales leaders on how to train. And then we started to build training kind of for us, by us, like how to help the sellers sell in context of the framework or within the sales process, and that's how we build kind of the excellence of winning the stages of the sales process. And I think, with JP and Brian coming on board and like having a seller just focused on that, and then having a team of ex-sellers focused on that, kind of turbocharged the next level. And then we've basically replicated that at DBT with Joe Dabrowski, who's made a huge impact on both the seller and the sales leader curriculum, and then now we're also doing the same thing on the sales engineering side, right? So I think focusing on like enablement as a skill, and doing it specific to people that know how to sell is a critical differentiator for you in the market.
Is there anything else you need to, in order to bring in a seller who's not necessarily from an enablement training background themselves, even though as a leader, that is part of their role? Is there a way of complementing them with people around them, if you were to actually implement that as a...
So what we've done with Joe is we have Tisha, who runs the kind of the traditional enablement team, has done a great job, and she's a machine, right? And she's been at multiple startups with companies like Grafana to really like understand like how to train people at scale. And I think having that marriage of like traditional training with like sales leader led is really important. The other thing we've taken Sam Brandt, who was the head of sales of a company that we acquired that's been through the playbook. We put him on Joe's team. So now we can activate him to, again, more enablement as a skill. And the goal is to move him into a more senior leadership position in the future. So it's also a good rotational program of moving people into that, because back to the skill training is like being able to carry people out to go gain a skill to then move back gives you better opportunities to take advantage of those opportunities as they come up, right? Because you built those skills.
Yeah, awesome. As I said, Brian was a massive advocator of that, and as I said, constitutes a lot of the success of Rubrik.
The proof's in the pudding, right?
So and as recruiters and people that obviously bring people in, it's definitely something we try and push now a little bit more, and being a bit more open mindset to that. But again, I think there's the theory, but then how do we apply it into in a business, and how do we create an ecosystem around it to actually make it as a function work?
Yeah, and our sales leader in Europe did the same thing at Mongo. He was a sales leader, and so the Alistair did a great job as a sales leader. Then they moved him enablement, and then now he's come here to build out Europe, and he's moved from first line to second line, built a team because he can train everybody. Right.
Is there anything? So if you are thinking about potentially doing that in your in the organization, and you're trying to do that, are there certain traits that you're looking for within those individuals outside the obvious?
Yeah, Joe's a good example, right? He as a first-time leader, trained people that you hired a team of potential, right? And he ramped them faster than anybody else. Yeah. And when he dug into it, it was the amount of training that he created. And he's passionate about it. Like, he enjoys it. It's fun for him. So I think you want people, instead of like just rotating them, you want to make sure they're passionate about the thing to then build the skill. They understand like what's in it for them as well. And then they're energized for it is really a critical thing. And do they have the skills that they can train on? Yeah. Right? Because again, you got to master something to be able to teach other people on it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, because could it derode you from, if you are as prescripted as to say, do you know what, I want to become a CRO? Can it lead you off, or do you think it actually complements?
I think it complements you. I think as many things as you can gain a little bit of experience, but not lose that North Star, it will take you farther. If you're in one job and you just go to the next job and the job after that, you're just learning from people that are exactly like you. Yeah, there's only so much skill that you can get. But if you're kind of put yourself in different experiences to get a different point of the business, you'll get a lot more out of it. Like, I was able to do an enablement job on the side with my sales job, early at EMC, and I realized like an alliances job. So I did an alliances job on the side.
Yeah.
And, it gave me more empathy of like, how do you drive a joint go-to-market? Like what's in it for your joint customers? What's in it for their rep? What's in it for your rep? And then I realized that like, I'm not going to go down that path, but it made me better at alliances and treating those alliances and partners like customers than I had previously to doing that.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that co-sales motion, again, you're not just within the alliances, but with the big cloud service providers is a very, very big strategy now used and adopted across lots of technology companies because of their reach and their power into, the customers and really understanding their pains.
And if you understand them
Yeah.
and what's important to those reps,
Yeah.
and you can amplify that message to them, then you cut through the other 10,000 ISVs that are trying to also work with them.
Yeah,
right?
well, this is the thing. We've done a whole series dedicated to this, and if anybody's interested in it, there's a channel series dedicated where we've had the likes of Tom Henderson and Giselle Gardner Johnson that have really kind of demonstrated the value. And I think if you look at Wiz and what they've been doing recently, again, it is more on the security side, but it is that channel first mindset. You can ramp your sales team quicker and has a huge impact.
It was so important to us. We actually pay our reps more on deals done through a marketplace than we do through a direct deal because we want to amplify that engagement with those service providers.
Yeah.
This seems like a really basic question, but why giving skills? Why is it important?
Yeah, it's like the definition of insanity. Like if you're not getting better, right, then you're going to top out on your your capability and your potential. But also from a company standpoint, is like you take people in, right, what they can control. And I talk to sales reps. I'm like, hey, I'm hiring for two reasons. One is to create pipeline because that's what you can control, and two is to get better and be coachable around a sales process. And if you do those things, you will be successful, right? And we have as many proof points as we can tell to go do that. And I think it drives a couple things. One is productivity, right? If you have people coming in and the input is the same around pipeline generation, but you make them better at each stage, the output goes up, which is productivity. Also, from like a skill perspective, it's not just having the opportunity to move into like a leadership job, but can I train you to recruit really well as a sales rep to help your team recruit and help enable your team of the things you do well, right? And train the rest of your people on your team and build those skills before you moved in a leadership job. So when the opportunity presents itself, you're running. And I think that's what's really important is like building the skills for the next job for people allows you to build a more resilient company, but also it allows people to like, you get more out of people when they realize that they can realize their potential in the opportunity.
Mm. Is that something you're very conscious of when you're putting people in certain seats around not necessarily the job that you need them to do now, but the future of capability of what they can grow into?
Yeah, like we talk about 3X capability. When we hire people, it's like, can they do the job we're hiring them for, the next job? And if we keep growing and adding skills, the job after that. And that's got to be a guiding principle because like, again, one of the things I was fortunate to come back to the Rubrik days is 80% of our leadership roles were promoted from within. So like people grew with the company. And I think that's where, again, another part of productivity is how do you keep attrition low, right? And people, if they're meeting that potential and they see opportunity, they stay, right? You're not resetting productivity all the time. So I think, again, we're very conscious of it. And that's why the recruiting is such an important part because we talked about, Nick Celtics on the way here, right? Yeah. The team with more talent wins more games.
Yeah.
So which one's the team with most? Conversation.
As a Boston guy,
we'll find out tonight.
Yeah.
Thanks to our sponsor, Pipeline Generation AI, the platform that researches your top accounts, creates insights and assets to help you engage more effectively. Elevate your conversations and transform your pipeline with Pipeline Generation AI today.
Obviously, these are really important principles, but I want to just go back to a little bit more on your journey because you look at the success that you've had and it does look like a straight line, right? You can see, the trends, it's kind of job after job and you can kind of see the progression. But in reality, you spoke a lot about your learnings in setbacks, right?
Yeah.
So I just want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think, again, we've done Force a few times. The learning is in the struggle. So it's, there's no truer thing, right? And I think any company, when I was at EMC, right, we went from 0 to $1 billion in the commercial business in 5 years, but 80% of the people that went to the field failed, right? And then they had to reset the program to build a machine that has all these people successful in the market in very senior leadership roles. At Rubrik, we had some dark days, right? We were outgrowing Snowflake, in the early days. And then it got to a point where we kind of topped off. Other things came in. We had some turnover, and we had to be resilient around, hey, we're all getting recruited to go to other places, but we have control over this. So how do we make it successful, and how do we make everyone at this company be in the tip of the spear to be successful together, right? So that people get bonuses, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where the learning is. It's through the hard and the good. And I've been fortunate to stay at places for 12 years, 4.5, 6.5 years. And the learning was fighting through the things that were hard. And I think that's where that skill acquisition really comes into light.
It's interesting you say that because, I think especially nowadays, you see it, when the going gets tough, a lot of people are tempted to just say, I'm just going to join the next. I know you've just touched on it, but I think we just want to go a little bit deeper on that.
Yeah.
Why is it so important to really see yourself through the hard times?
I think a couple things. If you're not fully into the future, right? And this is the good and the bad times. Focusing back to those basics of am I making myself successful, not just this quarter, but the next quarter and the quarter after that? And you're not bought into I'm going to get through anything. You stop investing in your future. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I've seen that happen where reps will get into, from a ramp. It's they get in that trough of disillusionment from month 6 to month 9. And they're hey, I don't know if I'm going to make it, right? And then they stop creating pipeline, and then they don't make it. Versus the reps are hey, I can control my pipeline generation. I can control bringing people into my business, and we're going to team tackle this. Those people get through. And I think even in good times, right? I've seen situations where we did 140% of the number, then 122% of the number, and sometimes people forget what got them there. And then keeping people focused on no, the reason we're having the success is the pipeline generation that you did 6 to 9 months ago. So that started to dip off. It's going to bite us, right? I think it's super critical. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I suppose I was also alluding to more kind of the wartime mentality, right? Why do you grow and why do you learn so much when the going gets tough?
Because the only way through it is through it, right? And I think, if you're in situations you haven't been in before and you got to figure out a way through it, that's what turns into a skill. Right? Because, I've seen the problem identification is the most important thing. The situations change, right? And I think the more kind of experience you get kind of fighting through the tough times and learning through the process, it might not always work out, but you're going to learn either way, which will help you the next time, right? Because you're going to use, again, 20, 30% of that situation to, again, adapt, and will make you more successful the next time.
But at that time, obviously, you're not making as much money. Perhaps, organizations going through difficult times.
Yeah.
How do you weigh up the kind of the pros and cons of saying, do you know what, I am going to lose some money here because we're not hitting number, or bonuses are being cut, or whatever it may be, versus saying this is an important time for me to learn through this?
Yeah, I think it comes back to the grass is always greener, or can be always greener, versus are you betting on yourself? Are you betting on your own grit? You can get through it, and can you acquire skills and get better in the process? And I think people that do that over and over again tend to be more successful, right?
Do you think that's important? Do you think you can get to the levels that without hanging around through those difficult times? If you reflect on your career, how important were they for your development and where you are today?
I think for me, again, I think in my career I moved up early to sales leadership, then I moved back to a sales role to move into globals, then I did some alliances work, and then I jumped out of EMC to SAP to prove I could do it, like I said. And I think kind of forcing yourself into those situations that are hard is where that skill acquisition happens. And I think what happens is if you're just linear in your progression, then you're only learning from people kind of like you, and there's only so much you can learn, right? Versus if you're seeking out skills and you're seeking out those experiences that you can gain more skills, those people, one, tend to be more resilient, but two, in the long term, tend to be more successful, right? And I think so that's what it comes down to. It's are you going to let the situation beat you, or are you going to go learn from it, right?
Where does that come from? Is there anything, without getting too philosophical or too deep here, is there something in your background which has, created that, or is it just...
I moved 17 times growing up as a kid.
Right, okay, well.
Right? So I think one of those things you kind of had to reset over and over again and like kind of figure out what are the things like make friends. And like for me, it was sports was a big thing.
Yeah.
And then just the resiliency of like those two things between sports, resetting teams, resetting friends over and over again.
17 times.
17 times.
Wow.
Yeah.
Over what period of time?
My dad was in sales, right? So
I was in
okay.
sales. I
Yeah.
thought he was in the military.
yeah.
He was in sales. Okay.
Yeah, right from I think from when I was 5 years old all the way through college, we
Wow.
kept moving.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. So, going back to the career decisions that you've made, obviously, as Simon mentioned at the very beginning part of this, the start was, EMC, then SAP, then Rubrik. What were the decisions in each of those transitions and why did you take the roles that you took? And, was it people? What was the...
Yeah, I always loved good jobs that I was in with
Exactly,
like great
yeah.
people. And it was always like, what is the skill acquisition and like what am I going to get out of this that I wasn't getting out of like the current thing. So like at EMC, it was great opportunity. EMC was making a bunch of money, but I saw kind of the market change and like SaaS was going to go eat infrastructure.
Yeah.
And it was, so I looked at who's kind of innovating themselves around SaaS, and SAP just bought 3 SaaS companies. So I figured I can go learn that skill and move up the value chain. Which
Right.
I learned a bunch of things. Also, it was more of an empathy-based culture, right? Because you run your business on SAP. And just the culturally was different, which then, again, rounded me out from kind of how I led and kind of how I operated like within business. Rubrik was, I was getting promoted to SAP, right?
Yeah.
So it was like a good situation. But again, I had people that I knew and I trusted. They were like, hey, how do we build the next great sales execution machine? Because EMC went away, right? And that was a guiding principle to then give back to all these people that helped me early.
Yeah.
How do I give back to kind of the next generation of people and help them grow their career, right? So there was always like an opportunity to get something out of it from like a skill acquisition or opportunity perspective. And just like DBT is like there's moving into the world of data and AI, right? Because the AI doesn't work without great data. Allowed me kind of stretch there, and then helping an international team and interacting with these staff and kind of building a company was an opportunity. So it's always looking for like that skill acquisition, but also the people you're doing it with.
Yeah.
Like, have they done it before? Did they have skills that you can learn from? And you generally want to go build a business with these people.
Did you resonate to the problem solving part of that, or is it what is it that draws you in? As I said, is it the problem solving matter, or is it the enjoyment of growth? What's the
I think it's a
motivator?
couple things. Like the guiding principle for me is like, how do you build that next great opportunity for people, like that reputation of like the next great sales execution machine? Because I feel like it always comes back to that EMC thing, right? Of like, I'd put that sales team against anybody on the planet at that point in time, right? So how do you build the next one? And in order to do that, you have to have a problem that you're solving that's worth solving for the business. Like, how do you really help your customer's customer is critical. And then if you have that opportunity and then you're building kind of the execution machine to take advantage of that opportunity, then people are going to grow their careers and the success is just going to happen, right? If you're hiring great people, they're getting better, the opportunity is there, and you have the growth, like that's where like kind of the magic happens. And I think DBT very much had that opportunity, especially because it's in those 2 macro trends with like the growth of the cloud data warehouse and then obviously AI needing data.
You used the word empathy, right? And I know that's something that's really important to you.
Yeah.
That's something you kind of acquired at SAP, but also how do you bake that into your leadership style, into how you kind of support your team, but also a skill that you try and pass on to others?
I think it's, again, I'd start with I mentioned the org chart, you flip it upside down. We have to recognize we're all overhead, right? And our job is just to make the sales reps and the team that surrounds the sales reps successful. So everything we do is just to service that. Like, how do we help make sure that like the machinery around the rep helps them create pipeline? How do we make sure the things around the rep from a marketing, product marketing, et cetera, help them focus on their customers to solve problems? Where are there opportunities that, reps could trip over? Like, how do we get them upskilled or make sure they don't trip over the same thing that other reps are getting? It's really just to make them successful. Because like, it comes back to like, we hire great people out of great jobs with the hope that they're going to have more success in this job. So like, we've got to be true to that, and everything's got to service that. And I think you just make different decisions if you're looking at everything through the eyes of the people, those people. And it's also important as we're doing things like skill acquisition and training, you have to do it in context of like, this is why it's good for you. Just like customer, right? And it's treating your people like they are your customer, because they are. And, sometimes we forget that when we move from like salesperson to sales leader, but it's also the rest of the company, and galvanize the rest of the company to focus on how do we, if we make the rep successful, then we'll have more money to bring in and build great products. And those two parts of the organization have to be super successful. And then it's having empathy for the customer, right? Like, again, we don't sell software. We build champions who sell software for us. We're helping people with a personal win solve a business problem so that they can help their company and they can help their company's customer. So I think everything you do comes back to empathy. And sometimes, again, these are basic things, but it's really like not losing sight of the things that are important and being great at those things.
Did you always plan? Did you always have a North Star to become a CRO, or is it just something that's just naturally fallen into place?
I never really had a goal to be a CRO, honestly. It was like every step I ever made was focused on the skill acquisition. Like I had an interview for an MBA, and they were like, "Hey, what do you want to be? Do you want to, when you grow up?" type thing. And it was like every other candidate we talked to wants to be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Right. I was like, let's just do some math. Right. There's 50 companies or 50 different schools that are top 50 in the MBA. They each have 1,000 students. There's 500 jobs for CEO. There's probably 50 of them come up every year. So that might as well buy a lottery ticket, right? So like for me, it's always been around this skill acquisition. Right. And, I came to Rubrik to go build a company with people I like working with and then kind of give back. And I got myself to a situation where like the next logical step was that role. So I think if you just keep focusing on like that skill acquisition and like, are you meeting your own personal potential? Like those opportunities will present themselves. Yeah. But again, I'm not saying it's the right way to do it, just kind of how I've done it.
I think it's an interesting point. We obviously talk to lots of people that are at that point of either transitioning or looking to become a CRO. What were some of the biggest learnings that you've learned from running Americas for Rubrik now to stepping up and being a full responsibility for the...
I think everything goes back in services, making the sales team successful. And it's not like about making the sales reps make a bunch of money. Like that's important. And like if you hire A players, that's an expectation, right? Really comes down to just helping the rest of the company galvanize around it. Like is marketing set up around the things that they're doing to help the rep create pipeline and execute on a sales process, focus on the customer pain. We did force management. Is everything we're doing from a product development, right, and product management perspective fit within the framework of like how we enable the sales teams to, again, do discovery, find pain, set required capabilities, right, to get them access to build champions and to an executive buyer. Everyone has to understand that. And, it's spending more time with like, again, your E team, which is now your nuclear team of building champions within those groups by helping them. Just like you help your champions, it's like, what are the things that they care about that you can help them with? And what are the things that the sales team needs from all of the supporting organizations to make them successful?
I want to take this opportunity to ask you all very kindly to go and hit the subscribe button. Whether you're on YouTube, iTunes, or Spotify, it will mean the world to us if you could hit that subscribe button. It means we can continue to bring you great content and will ensure that you don't miss out on any of our great content.
As a CRO, in any role in sales or in any role anywhere, building internal champions is obviously really important. When you're in the CRO role, who are the internal champions that you're most aligned to, or that you've had to kind of really adjust your kind of lens and view to really kind of work with?
The most successful companies I work with understood that like there's two main pillars that make companies really successful. As like the sales reps that we're meeting with customers and the SAs and like kind of that tip of the spear, that customer experience person that's identifying the problem, helping the customer solve the problem, build champions. And then there's the product teams that are building and shipping product. And everyone else is supporting those two pillars, because if the sales team is super successful and like brings in a bunch of revenue, brings in profit, that's more money to build the next great product, right? And if the engineering team is wildly successful, then that's going to help the sales team sell more product and be more productive. And I think like that symbiosis is super important. And then having everyone kind of help support that structure. I think that, that's one. The second thing is like, in giving context of like what the sales team needs to make that work. The other one is from a CFO perspective. We have an unbelievable CFO, and she's looking at like, again, things like cash management, cost of sale, et cetera. Rule of 40 is an important thing, right? Yeah. And as you kind of move back between growth and Rule of 40, how do you chart the course effectively? And then helping understand the difference between like cost management and then driving productivity, right? So if there's kind of the handshake agreement of like, if I'm getting money to invest, then I'm going to drive more productivity, which is going to drive more revenue. And in really getting aligned on like that's a really important metric to focus on the growth, as opposed to, I've been in other places where like you try to cut your way to growth and that story ends pretty quick, right?
Yeah. Was there anything that now on reflection of taking on that CRO, which was the biggest learning curve for you in your transition into a CRO?
So a couple things. One is we're an open source company.
Yeah.
Right. So, giving away a bunch of the value for free, which, we wouldn't be here without the community, right? We've got over 1 million people using the product. There's 50,000 companies that use it. It's kind of it is the standard of how people connect to their cloud data warehouse and access like their structured data within an environment. But really that value exchange between what goes into the free product versus what goes into the paid product is always an interesting dichotomy. And you got to serve both, understanding like, hey, you want to build virality within the community so that we can monetize them in the customer journey with more value on the enterprise version. That's one. The other one is the international expansion, right? And going back to the productivity, it was like, it's easy to drop a bunch of bodies all over the world. And it's trying to figure out, okay, if I have a certain amount of money to invest, when do I want to invest in this country? And then what are the resources to make it successful? So like we just opened up Japan, right? Wildly successful early in Japan, right? We had about $1 million in ARR without a rep there. So then we put a rep in and just, we hired the right person who can grow with the company, hired an SA, now we're hiring another rep, right? And it's taken off because we looked at what is our fastest path to productivity there and then made those investments. We've also looked at things like, from a productivity standpoint, is like emerging markets. Instead of dropping a rep in Israel and a rep in Saudi Arabia, can we use a hub model with an inside rep to then create enough demand, start a bunch of customers, and then when it makes sense, because we're at $500,000 to $1 million in ARR, then we drop resources in. So it's really about being, again, right tool, right job, and being smart of like short-term and long-term investments, and then having a sales team that's bought in to make it successful, understanding it's like a means to an end.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Talking about this, it's an interesting subject that's come up a couple of times now, especially I think now in today's times, which is obviously we came out of the pandemic, which went into the pandemic, which forced everybody to have kind of, satellite offices, working from home.
Yeah.
What's your view on this? Do you feel that, having more of an in-house company culture is...
So DBT was a remote first, born in COVID company, right? And, there's a lot of great things that come out of that, right? And they were very specific around like when they got the team together. So when they did kickoff, it was a company kickoff. Right. And everyone got together, right? So I think that was great. But now that we're kind of at scale, right? We've got a hub down the street in the Flatiron District. We have one in Austin. We have one in Dublin, and we're looking for where do we do in the APJ region. Is having that camaraderie of team that's growing and scaling together. You're going to learn more from that experience, right? So again, if I'm really focused on like how do we take a SDR and then build the skills within a year to move them to a commercial rep. And then once they're successful there, it's a meritocracy. Like your most successful people, you give them the opportunity to meet that potential. Then you move them to an enterprise rep or a commercial sales leader. And then building that skills, you're going to get more out of like the energy and learning from each other of being in that experience. And I got that from being in the basement at EMC at the age of 22 years old, right? Where you'd bump into the person next to you or, the sales team that I had with, they already mentioned the names, right? Those are the experience of learning from the rest of the team. You get more out of those experiences. Yeah. But you got to balance it, right? You also want to be where your customers are.
Yeah, which is it. And as I said, Dan Fougere was very, very adamant, everything that he learned, even just in the coffee chats or the standing there by the water cooler and you're communicating, or the peripheral learning, what you're learning from hearing others on the phone or in situational stuff
Product
like that.
team, the SEs. Yeah.
There's also like a little bit of that kind of co-opetition of being in the office with the people that you're all trying to move up together and learn from.
Yeah.
That competition of like, hey, I want to help my buddy next to me, but I also want to be at the top of the stack rank.
Yeah.
That drives teams to a greater kind of altitude, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're an A player, you want to be on a team of A players learning with A players.
Yeah.
Right? There's nothing that like drives resentment more than like this goes back to the 60% thing. If you're carrying the rest of your team, you drive resentment and then you lose that A player and then you reset the productivity and the whole kind of house falls down.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important that like you service, if you're going to go hire top talent, that you create a opportunity around them where like they can get better as well. And I think sometimes people lose sight of that.
Yeah, you spoke at the part of this. I think it was SAP where you took from rep productivity from 17% to 1 in 5 to almost 3 or 75%. Was it?
We had I think specifically when I was at SAP, this was kind of the learning around like take the org chart and flip it upside down. Is like at SAP 17% of the reps hit the number.
Yeah.
Right. And there was enough kind of hedging in the quotas that the company could still be successful. For me, we never missed a number. Right. And it was because we always had 60% of the team plus hit the number. So like just seeing of like, are we always servicing? Is every rep have the pipeline? Does every rep have like the early stage opportunities to make sure they're hitting this quarter and next quarter? Because you don't want to leave people behind.
Yeah.
It's just math.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So like by taking kind of going back to the next 2 jobs is every time I kind of took something over, I would increase the participation or the amount of reps over the number, and the productivity goes up.
Yeah.
Right. So like again, I go to Rubrik. If I took something and 35% of the reps hit the number, and we went to 60%, well, the productivity is going to go up by north of 50%.
Yeah.
So I think those things kind of taught me that lesson.
Yeah.
Plus, it's like again, we kind of owe it to the people to make them successful.
Yeah. How much of that was through enablement, and how much of that was through, do you know what, we've got the wrong people in the wrong seat?
And there's both,
right?
And I think back to the point is like you got to make sure that like you, again, if you have the best athletes, you're going to win more games, but you also have the ability to make them better. And I think if you're if you have a team of A players, they don't want to be kind of on the same team with C players and carrying them, right? They want to make sure that people are pushing them to get better so they get the most of themselves. But then it comes down to like, again, those leading indicators, like what are the things that tell you if they're going to be successful in the future? And then how do you upskill them so that like they're better at each stage of the sales process? Because like if you have the inputs and you're better at each stage between the output's going to go up.
So another conversation that keeps coming up in recent interviews that we've been doing is, people trying to, fast track their career beyond their point of actually having the skills ready to move on to the next level.
Yeah.
When you reflect on your career, when you think about all the different stages of development for you, did you find yourself rushed to the next seat? Did you find, or were you more in seats that you could actually get the skills that needed?
Yeah, I think I had different situations, right? Where I was rushed. Again, I was a sales leader at 27 years old, and honestly, probably didn't have the emotional maturity to do that job at that point in time. But I learned a lot in those 3 years. Being at a high growth company, you're going to get moved up quickly, right? And I think what's important is you got to master the current job to be able to teach in the next job. Because if you're a second line leader and you weren't great at recruiting and great people and driving the number and driving the leading indicators and like digging in and helping the reps sell, right? And like making the reps better, then how are you going to teach leaders to do those things as a second line leader? Because that's the job of like second line leaders make great leaders who make great salespeople, right? So I think what's really important is like you master the current job to be able to do the next job, or it's going to get in your way, right? And you kind of owe it to the people to be able to help them in that next turn. And if you do that well, then guess what? You're a third line leader. Right?
Yeah. Again, there's a lot of people talking about, the playbook itself, and, some people get this playbook and they think they can just go and apply it in any organization in the same way. What's your experience of really coming into each of the different organizations and having to really think about the playbook and how we apply it in those different spaces?
Again, I think it's a blueprint, not an instruction manual. And I think that's where sometimes I've seen people get challenged with it, is they say, this is the way we do it. This is how we did it the last place. Let's do that here. And I think here, what the big lesson of being a high growth company is you get really good at problem identification and having the blueprint or the framework to figure out, okay, what is the problem we're solving? How much of what I've seen in the past will work? And then you might only be able to use like 30% of like the learning. You've got to adapt it to like what's going to work and the problem that you're in. I think a lot of times what happens is people come company to company and they're like, oh, I'm just going to run it the way we ran it at the last place. But they weren't there to actually solve the problem at the last place. And they don't know why that process existed, right? So I think really getting good at like the problem identification and then figuring out what is the solution to that problem specific to where you are at the stage you're at. Because it's different from like 50 to 100 million is different from 100 to 500, which is different from 500 to a billion plus. And I think those are the key things of like leaders that do that really well will be able to grow with the company.
When we talk about problem identification, obviously you're talking about understanding how your sales, you're looking at the mechanics of your sales engine, right? You're looking at lots of different facets of that. And obviously, we spoke off air about the kind of the similarities of how you apply, how you navigate a sell and the principles of really understanding what's going on with a sell to actually applying it to understanding your sales engine, the kind of the marriage between the two.
Yeah.
So help us understand a little bit about, really going into, where are the gaps? What's hurting me in this process?
I think there's a gap identification. There's kind of positive and negative that come out of those things, right? So like, again, when I went to Rubrik, one of the issues they had is they ran a monthly number and deals would just slip out of the back of the month, right? And it was like, okay, great. Why is this going on? You kind of dig into some deals and you see the trends. You go on ride days and you figure it out. And pretty quick, it was like, oh, like we're building champions, but we don't have like accountability on both sides. So how do we train the team to do things like a mutual action plan where we have an agreement to say, hey, this is the business outcome we're trying to deliver. Here are all the things that we have to go do. And let's validate that with like the champion, the EB, and procurement, make sure everyone's on the same page to actually turn from like a salesperson to a project manager. And just training people on that skill, cut the slip deals in half in like a quarter, right? But it really had to do with like seeing the data to figure out like what's kind of going wrong and then figure out like how do we step in with enablement around like what good looks like and then get everyone on the same page. On the other side of it, right? So you have teams like there's a guy who's at DBT, Joe Dabrowski, runs productivity. So he runs, his job is to get up every day and figure out how do I ramp people faster? How do I get them more productive? And he runs the enablement function. He runs the SDR function because again we're promoting that talent. So having those tied together really important. And then he runs the value engineering function. So he was at Rubrik with us and he was a first line leader, right? And he wanted to move to second line, and but he figured out like what skills does he have, and we didn't have a job open at that point. And I looked at it, and it was like he's ramping people faster than anybody else, and he's probably hiring people that are more junior in terms of like their sales career, but he's making them more productive faster, and an unbelievable talented team. So like we took him and we said, okay, let's move him into like a productivity enablement role and make everybody better, and use that skill, which then ended up being his superpower when we made a change from like a backup company to a cyber resilience company and change how people sold because he was so good at it. Right. So now he's doing that here where we're moving from like a data company to an AI company, right? And having someone that's focused on that skill acquisition, but like it's not just seeing like the problems, but also seeing like where's their greatness that we can elevate to help everyone benefit.
Tell us a little bit about DBT Lab. Tell us a little bit about the journey, the mission that you're on right now.
Yeah, so DBT Labs, right, started as a tool to drive like developer productivity for people that with this advent of the cloud data warehouse, right? Companies like Snowflake came along early, right? When people moved out things like Teradata, and then Databricks comes along, and then you have like BigQuery and you have AWS Redshift, and it's what's happened is this renaissance coming out of COVID of people, everyone's turned to a software company, everyone's turned to a data company. Now people have multiple tools. So having kind of one tool that how people like make sure they have quality data for the enterprise and how do you give the business what they need from their data? That's all flipped on its head with AI, right? So now that AI, most of the problems or the projects that are failing because of AI goes back to the data. So now we're sitting in this kind of great spot to really help. Like it's the tool that everybody uses or wants to use as standard around connecting to your data, and you don't have data without AI. So really being that infrastructure layer that sits between AI or analytics and the data to make your customers successful is kind of where we sit in the world.
And what do the next few years look like at DBT? Do you have ambitious plans and scaling and growth? And
Yeah. I mean, again, we've had pretty significant growth, similar to what we had at the last place. We've been able to reaccelerate. We just hit well over 100 million, right? And now we're in a world where we're trying to reaccelerate that growth. And we have a great new product leader that's come on to really drive the AI product direction. Right. And the goal is to be the standard of like not just the data standard, but now the AI standard, and merge those two worlds together. And we have great partnerships with companies like Databricks, Microsoft, AWS, and Snowflake, and Google, right? And working with each of them to really help their customers, right? And with the growth of those industries, we'll drive a lot of our growth.
Awesome.
Well, I think this is the point when we reflect on what's been a great session. It's been fantastic to have you, come out and fly out to New York and spend some time with us. But I just want to kind of reflect on some of the points that I think really underpin what's been a stellar trajectory. And you can see at the various stages of your career, it does seem linear. It does seem as though you've kind of had this very natural upward trajectory. But I think there are some real fundamentals as to why that success has been the way it's been. First of all, it's your resilience to stay through not only the good times, but also really seeing through the difficult times, but also the focus on that kind of skill acquisition. But going back to those skills, your early exposure at EMC and learning the playbook from the kind of the PTC and really applying a problem identification mindset to really go and remedy and find the gaps to really help you be not just an executor for the sake of executing, but really going and figuring out how do I make this better, but more importantly, how do I make my people better? And I think that people-centric problem identification process has been so fundamental to the success that you're having. We wish you all the success at DBT, and we look forward to seeing how things really kind of materialize for you. So I want to say a massive thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
Nice
to meet you guys.
Yeah, it's been amazing. And I think the only other thing to add to that, and I think is, even though you're talking about very, very complex problems, your ability to really simplify these and look at, find where the leak is in an organization, first of all, to then, okay, so now where do I need to really focus my time and actually get into the detail and into the reads of where the problem actually is. But because of, your enjoyment to get to such a granular level as well on each of those, because of the experience and the fact that you've focused in each of those different career milestones, and mastered them, it's really enabled you to understand, where those are. So yeah, it's been truly, fantastic, and we really appreciate, as I said, coming in from San Francisco and seeing us here in New York. So to all our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you've heard, please do subscribe to our various channels on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. All the links will be in the description below, and we look forward to welcoming you back for another session very soon. Thank you and goodbye.